In my own family, I was an outsider. In my parents' eyes, I wasn't their daughter. I was a business plan, a walking asset, a trust fund with a heartbeat. And when I refused to sign the next check, they threw me away on a foreign dock, like a worthless, depreciating stock. They never expected that the asset they just liquidated was the one holding all the passwords. I'm Evelyn, and this is the diary of my reckoning. Before I turn every page, I need to know someone is actually seeing me, not as a number on a balance sheet. Please comment listening below, or let me know where you're listening from. Your connection is a reminder that even when your own family renders you invisible, a person's voice can still have weight. Don't forget to subscribe and join me on this journey where the unspoken feelings of the past finally find their voice. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. It began on a yacht named after my mother. The Eleanor was 150 feet of polished fiction, a gleaming white lie slicing through the sapphire waters of the Amalfi Coast. To the outside world, it was the very picture of dynastic success, a testament to the Ambrose name. To me, it was a floating prison, and I was not only the inmate but also the warden who paid for its gilded upkeep. The sunset bled across the sky in hues of orange and violet as we anchored in a secluded cove. Dinner was served on the aft deck, branzino poached in white wine tomatoes, that tasted of sunshine and a bottle of Vermentino, sweating in a silver bucket. My father, Richard, was holding court. He was regaling our guests, the formidable Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, with a story about a hostile takeover he'd supposedly orchestrated in the 90s. A story I knew, beat for beat, was a complete fabrication he'd lifted from a business memoir. My mother Eleanor glittered, dressed in white linen that contrasted with her sun-kissed skin, a constellation of diamonds at her throat. She was the consummate hostess. She laughed at the precise moments Richard's story required her hand, resting delicately on his forearm, as if to anchor his grandiosity. It was a flawless performance. Of course, we couldn't maintain this lifestyle without our brilliant Evie, Eleanor said, turning her radiant smile on me. The Harringtons followed her gaze, and I felt like an exhibit being presented for appraisal. She's an absolute wizard with numbers. Our girl can turn spreadsheets into gold. It's a pity she's so married to her work. She has no time for a life of her own. There it was, the gilded compliment as sharp and cold as the tines of her fork. A statement designed to both elevate me and diminish me in the same breath. It told the Harringtons I was competent, a valuable asset to the family brand. It also told them I was incomplete, a sterile workhorse with no value outside of my function, a subtle warning to any who might get too close. I gave the smile I had practiced for 20 years, a placid, gentle curve of the lips that betrayed nothing. I saw my father across the table, his eyes gleaming with a proprietary pride and a memory sharp and unwelcome surfaced. I was 19, standing in the cold, cavernous space of his first failed startup. The smell of dust and shattered dreams hung in the air. He wasn't crying. Richard never cried. He simply put a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly tight. "You won't let this happen again, will you, Evie?" he'd said, his voice a low command. "You're the ace up our sleeve, the family's fail-safe." It wasn't a question. It was a coronation and a condemnation all in one. Richard Mr. Harrington said, swirling his wine, pulling me from the memory. I was looking into that new restructuring fund, Helios, causing quite a stir. Any thoughts? My father's smile didn't falter, but I saw it. A flicker of something cold and sharp in his eyes. Panic. Helios. He chuckled a little too loudly. Volatile. Terribly so. I prefer assets with history with substance. More like this wine, wouldn't you say? He expertly pivoted, steering the conversation away from the subject with the ease of a practiced con man. But my internal alarms were screaming. My father was a terrible liar, and his tells were as obvious to me as a flashing red light on a stock ticker. He was hiding something. Something to do with Helios. And I knew with a certainty that chilled the warm Italian air that I would be the one expected to pay for it. The next day, we docked at Marina Piccola in Capri. The island rose from the sea like a limestone fortress, dazzling and ostentatious, the perfect stage for my family's particular brand of theater. While Eleanor and the Harringtons went off to shop for overpriced ceramics and designer sandals, I found myself walking alone along the Via Camerelle, the weight of the previous night's discovery heavy in my gut. In my pocket, nestled in a velvet box, was a Patek Philippe watch, a Calatrava reference 1596G. It was a masterpiece of quiet elegance, of legacy and timelessness. I had spent months tracking it down for Richard's birthday next month, a surprise I'd planned for the trip. I told myself this gift could be a bridge. Perhaps this one grand gesture, this symbol of heritage and permanence, could make him see me not as his failsafe, but as his daughter. It was a foolish hope, but it was the only one I had. I found him sitting alone at an outdoor cafe, staring out at the impossibly blue water. For a moment, he looked his age, a man worn down by a lifetime of chasing a status that always remained just out of reach. He saw me and beckoned me over, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. "There she is," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "Come sit with your old man." Hope that stubborn, idiotic thing fluttered in my chest. He started talking about the old days, before the ambition had curdled into desperation. He talked about teaching me to ride a bike, about a silly song he used to sing to me when I was small. The tension in my shoulders began to ease. The air between us felt clean for the first time in a decade. This was it. This was the moment. I placed the small, heavy box on the table between us. "Dad," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "I wanted to give you something." Just as the words left my lips, his phone buzzed on the tabletop, the vibration aggressively loud in the tranquil quiet. The screen lit up with a single word in all caps: Helios. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the same cold panic I'd seen last night. The father I'd been speaking to for the last 5 minutes was gone, and the desperate businessman was back in his place. "Not now, Evie." He snapped, his voice sharp, dismissive. He snatched the phone from the table, turning away from me as he answered. "I have to take this. It's important." He walked away, leaving me at the table with the unopened gift and an ache in my chest so profound it felt like a physical wound. The hope didn't just die. It was executed, shot cleanly between the eyes. I should have left then. But some part of me, the part that still foolishly clung to the role of protector, followed him at a distance as he ducked into a quiet alley. I caught snippets of the conversation carried on the breeze, professional jargon that was my native tongue. Margin call, mandatory liquidation, the trust as collateral. My blood ran cold. The trust. The Ambrose family trust. My trust. the one I had structured with ironclad bylaws to protect our assets from his recklessness. Richard had no authority to use it as collateral. It was legally impossible, unless, unless he had committed fraud. The beautiful island suddenly felt like a trap, and the clear blue water looked deep enough to drown in. The final dinner was an exercise in exquisite torture. The Harringtons had departed, leaving the three of us to simmer in a thick, unspoken tension. The yacht was quiet, save for the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, a sound that would forever be linked in my memory to the feeling of impending doom. I couldn't be silent any longer. The performance was over. I waited for the steward to clear the main course, then placed my tablet on the polished teak table. The screen was illuminated with a series of emails I'd sent Richard over the past year, all with the subject line, "Warning Helios Fund Risk Analysis." "We need to talk about Helios," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used with clients when their portfolios were hemorrhaging money and they needed a surgeon, not a sympathizer. Richard cornered, dropped the charade. He confessed. But the truth was, a cancer far more malignant than I'd imagined. It wasn't just a bad investment made in secret. He had forged my signature on a series of personal guarantee documents, using my impeccable reputation and the trust's sterling credit to leverage an astronomical sum, an 8-figure position in a fund I had explicitly warned him was a house of cards. The losses weren't just catastrophic, they were career-ending. For me. "You have to fix this, Evie," he pleaded, the desperation making his face ugly and blotchy. "You have to make it right." Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange like a spectator at a tennis match, finally spoke. Her voice was not pleading. It was sweet, melodic, and utterly terrifying. "You're Evelyn Ambrose," she cooed as if speaking to a child who had scraped her knee. "You always find a way. Just this one last time." I looked at their faces, the faces of the two people I had spent my life trying to please, and I saw only strangers. Strangers who saw me as a function, a tool to be used and discarded. And for the first time in my 29 years, I said the word I was never allowed to say. No. I explained the consequences. That fixing it would require me to commit wire fraud, to illegally liquidate other clients' assets to cover his losses. It would mean prison time, the complete annihilation of the firm I had built from nothing. I told them that his actions had not only vaporized their net worth, but had also put a gun to the head of my entire professional life. The sweetness vanished from Eleanor's face, replaced by a glacial cold that was far more honest. "We gave you everything. The education, the opportunities, this perfect life. There is a price for that. Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if you are not part of the solution, you are the problem. And this family." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, "has no room for problems." Richard didn't say another word. He simply took out his phone and made a call. 10 minutes later, the yacht's tender, a sleek little boat used for shore excursions, was lowered into the water, its engine a low thrum in the night. The yacht's security chief, a stoic man whose generous salary I paid, approached me. "Ma'am," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "You have 10 minutes to pack a single bag?" I was escorted to my stateroom in a silent, surreal procession. I packed mechanically, my hands moving with a steadiness that defied the shattering of my world. When I was brought back to the deck, the tender was waiting. As I was left alone on the stone dock of Positano, the midnight air chilling my skin through my silk blouse, I looked up. Richard and Eleanor stood on the aft deck, bathed in the yacht's warm golden light. They were holding fresh champagne flutes, looking down at me, not with anger or sadness, but with a terrifying detached indifference. They looked like scientists observing a failed experiment that was now being disposed of. Then, the Eleanor, the magnificent vessel I had paid for, named for the woman who had just unmade me, slowly pulled away from the dock. Its lights grew smaller, eventually disappearing into the immense darkness of the Tyrrhenian Sea. I was alone in a foreign country with one suitcase and the Patek Philippe watch still heavy and cold in my coat pocket. The shock was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stole the air from my lungs. For a long moment, I just stood there on the cold, empty dock, the sound of the retreating yacht a fading heartbeat in the vast silence. The glamour of Positano, with its festive lights climbing the cliffside like fallen stars, felt like a cruel mockery of my sudden destitution. My first instinct was primal: survive. I pulled my suitcase, its wheels rattling a lonely rhythm on the ancient cobblestones toward the distant glow of the town square. I found an ATM tucked into a stone wall, overgrown with bougainvillea. I inserted my personal credit card, the one I used for everyday expenses, and punched in my code. Transaction denied. My breath hitched. I tried my debit card, the one linked to my personal checking. Transaction denied. A cold dread sharper than the sea breeze washed over me. This wasn't an oversight. This was a meticulously planned execution. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had financially decapitated me. I could picture them making the calls, their voices laced with false concern, reporting the cards stolen, freezing the accounts, methodically cutting every string that connected me to the world I knew. They wanted me utterly paralyzed, a ghost stranded in paradise with no way home. Panic sharp and acidic clawed at my throat. Then, through the fog of despair, a memory surfaced, a failsafe. Years ago, after a particularly nasty cyber attack scare involving a high net worth client, I'd structured a series of contingency measures for my firm. One of them was for me. A ghost account opened at a small, obscure bank in Delaware under my middle name, my mother's maiden name. I called it the Phoenix account, a fund for rising from the ashes. It existed completely outside the Ambrose Trust ecosystem. They had no idea it was there. It was a flaw in their otherwise perfect plan. I found a small, discreet hotel, away from the main tourist drag, its entrance, hidden down a narrow, jasmine-scented alley. I paid for a room in cash, the crisp euros from the Phoenix Fund, feeling like a lifeline in my trembling hand. The room was simple, its whitewashed walls and terracotta floor, a stark universe away from the stateroom on the yacht. But it was safe. It was mine. And in that sterile, anonymous room, I did not cry. The time for tears was a luxury I could not afford. The Evelyn they had abandoned on the dock was gone, a casualty of their war. In her place was the woman they had inadvertently created a crisis manager. I opened my hardened shell laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark. My fingers flew across the keyboard, not with desperation, but with the cold, focused precision of a predator stalking its prey. They had started a war. Now I would set the terms of engagement. I couldn't win this war from a hotel room in Italy. I needed a beachhead in Miami. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, I needed a shark. Someone who understood that in a battle like this, the only rule is to win. And I knew exactly who to call. Julian Croft. We were contemporaries, two predators circling the same high-stakes territory of Miami finance. We'd been on opposite sides of two major deals, and while I found his methods morally ambiguous, I had a profound respect for his mind. He was brilliant, ruthless, and loyal only to his own interests. He was perfect. I reached him on a secure, encrypted line. I laid out the situation in stark, emotionless terms. The forged signatures, the Helios Fund, the abandonment, the coordinated financial attack. I expected questions, perhaps even skepticism. Instead, I heard a low, appreciative laugh from the other side of the Atlantic. Richard and Eleanor Ambrose, he said, a note of dark amusement in his voice. I always knew they were sharks pretending to be dolphins. So, the family's greatest asset is finally fighting back. I'm intrigued, Evelyn. Deeply. He agreed to help, but his assistance came with a price. Of course it did. I'm in the middle of a hostile takeover of Sterling Cross, he said, getting straight to the point. One of your biggest clients, Mr. Tanaka, holds the key swing vote on the board. He's notoriously unpredictable. I need to know how he'll move. I don't need you to break privilege, Evelyn. I just need you to give me his psychological profile, his risk tolerance, his pressure points. You know him better than anyone. Give me that intel, and my firm, with all its lovely, vicious litigators, is yours. It was a devil's bargain. To save myself, I had to leverage a trusted client relationship for the benefit of a rival. It felt dirty, a betrayal in its own right. But Richard and Eleanor had taught me a valuable lesson on that dock in Positano. Loyalty is a liability. Survival is everything. You have a deal, Julian, I said, my voice firm. But you work for me. Every move is on my command. No surprises. Wouldn't dream of it, he purred. A new, uneasy alliance was forged. They were partners, but they both knew the other could betray them at any moment. From my Italian outpost, I began to build my arsenal. I sent Julian encrypted files from my cloud storage, the trust's original bylaws, the forged loan applications I'd surreptitiously copied, years of wire transfer records, showing my funds propping up their entire existence. We codenamed the operation Project Patek. We were no longer on the defensive. We were preparing to strike. As we were quietly assembling our weapons, my parents, having returned to Miami in a blaze of feigned victimhood, launched their own preemptive strike. It was a move of breathtaking cruelty and strategic brilliance. They didn't attack my finances. They attacked my sanity. My assistant Maria called me in a panic, her voice hushed and frightened. Evelyn, what is going on? Your mother is telling everyone you had a complete mental breakdown in Italy. The story they were weaving was as carefully constructed as one of my investment portfolios. I had become paranoid and unstable during the trip. I was having delusions threatening to harm myself and the family's reputation. They had been forced, heartbroken and weeping, to leave me in the care of a private, exclusive clinic in the Swiss Alps for my own safety. They were the tragic, concerned parents forced to make an impossible, selfless choice. The narrative spread through Miami's elite circles like a virus. In the world of high-stakes wealth management, where stability and rational judgment are the ultimate currency, the rumor was a death sentence. A small hedge fund client, citing a portfolio review, quietly pulled their account. A larger family office, one I had cultivated for years, called to request an emergency meeting to re-evaluate our partnership. The foundation of my career, the empire I had built on a bedrock of trust and competence, was beginning to crumble. I was about to launch a financial war, but I was simultaneously being discredited as a reliable narrator of my own life. They were trying to have me declared insane before I could even testify. "They're boxing you in." Evie Julian's voice was grim over the phone. "They are closing every door. If we don't act in the next 48 hours, their story becomes the official record. By the time you get back, you won't be a wronged daughter. You'll be the crazy, litigious heiress. You'll have nothing left to fight for." That's when he found it. The weapon of last resort. A clause I myself had written into the Ambrose family trust years ago. A failsafe I never dreamed I'd use against anyone but an outside hostile party. It was titled The Incapacity Protocol. It stated that if the beneficiaries, my parents, were found to be acting in a manner that constituted a critical existential threat to the trust's assets through gross negligence or fraud, the sole trustee, me, had the authority to assume unilateral control, effectively freezing them out completely to protect the fund. But it was a double-edged sword of the highest order. To invoke it, I had to file a formal, detailed dossier with the Securities and Exchange Commission, making the family's dirty laundry a matter of public record. It would trigger a massive, invasive audit of my entire firm, placing my other clients under a microscope they would not appreciate. It was a nuclear option. It would annihilate my parents, but the radioactive fallout could easily destroy me too. I was on a private jet arranged by Julian, streaking across the night sky back to Miami. The dossier he had compiled sat in my briefcase, a ticking bomb. Below me, the smear campaign was raging. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from nervous clients and concerned colleagues. I ignored them all. Instead, I took the Patek Philippe from my pocket. It wasn't a broken hope anymore. It was a trophy, a spoil of war. I fastened the cool leather strap around my wrist. Their time was up. As the grid of lights that was Miami appeared on the horizon, a sprawling constellation in the darkness, I made the call. "Julian," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "Activate the protocol. File the dossier. I want them to wake up tomorrow and find out their credit cards won't even buy them a cup of coffee." The war had officially begun. The execution of Project Patek was not a loud explosion, but a silent, seismic shockwave that radiated outward from my office with the speed of light. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a series of digital dominoes falling in the cold, sterile world of finance, where fortunes are unmade with a single, decisive keystroke. The first tremor hit my father on the perfectly manicured 18th green of the Riviera Country Club. He was laughing, one hand on the shoulder of a potential investor, the very picture of affable power. He gestured to the waiter to pay the bill for their drinks, handing over his heavy metal Amex Centurion card. The young man returned a moment later, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ambrose," he stammered. "It's been declined." Richard's laughter died in his throat. He produced another card, then another. Each was met with the same quiet, firm refusal. The investor's smile tightened, his eyes darting away. The club manager, a man who had practically bowed to my father for a decade, approached him with an icy politeness that was worse than any insult. "Richard," he said, dropping the formal "Mr. Ambrose, perhaps you should call your bank." As my father fumbled with his phone, an email alert chimed its subject line, a death sentence from his Swiss banker. Urgent notification. Suspension of access to Ambrose Family Trust. The blood drained from his face as whispers erupted from the other members on the terrace. The king had been dethroned in his own court. My mother's reckoning was fittingly more public. She was the star of a charity tea at the Bath Club, a grand dame holding court amidst a sea of pastel Chanel suits and the scent of orchids. She raised a paddle, making the winning bid on a gaudy diamond necklace, a triumphant smile on her face. A moment later, the event organizer, a woman she considered her closest confidant, leaned in and whispered in her ear. The smile on Eleanor's face froze, then crumbled. A choked, strangled sound escaped her lips as her friend informed her, with feigned sympathy, that her platinum card had been unceremoniously canceled. Then her phone buzzed. It was the frantic captain of the Eleanor informing her that the yacht charter company had just repossessed the vessel due to a payment default activated by the primary trustee and was preparing a lawsuit for damages. Her shriek, a raw, ugly sound of disbelief and fury, cut through the polite chatter. An entire room of Miami's most influential women watched their eyes wide with a delicious, merciless schadenfreude as the Queen's world publicly imploded. From my office, a war room paneled in dark mahogany and soundproof glass, Julian and I watched it all unfold. We weren't celebrating. We were monitoring data streams tracking the digital lockdown as it cascaded through their entire financial ecosystem. Every automated alert confirming a frozen account or a canceled line of credit was a small, tactical victory. It was precise, clean, and utterly devastating. When the final firewall was in place, Julian leaned back in his leather chair, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He walked over to a polished bar cart and poured 2 glasses of a very old, very expensive single malt. "To the Queen," he said, his voice holding a note of genuine admiration as he raised his glass in a toast. "The castle is yours. A flawless coup." I took the heavy crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the morning light. We had won. The blockade was absolute. They were financially neutered. But as I stared at a screen showing their primary checking account balance, a pathetic 3-figure sum that wouldn't cover a week of Eleanor's now-canceled flower arrangements, I didn't feel the expected thrill of victory. There was no sweet satisfaction, no triumphant joy. There was only a vast, hollow silence. The adrenaline that had fueled me for days, for weeks, finally receded, leaving behind the profound and unsettling quiet of an empty battlefield. I had won the war, but the enemy I had just systematically dismantled had my eyes and my blood. It felt like watching a controlled demolition of a building I had painstakingly designed and built myself. The triumph was in the perfect execution, but the tragedy was that it had to be destroyed at all. And in that moment of absolute victory, I had never felt more alone. After the initial shockwave, a strange and unnerving silence fell. For 3 days, there was nothing. No angry calls from my parents, no threatening letters from their lawyers, no desperate pleas through intermediaries. It was the eerie calm before a tsunami, the unnatural stillness when the sea pulls back from the shore, gathering its strength for one final devastating wave. "This is when they're most dangerous," Julian warned, his voice a low growl over our secure line. "They're out of financial and legal bullets. Now they'll start throwing rocks, emotional ones. Be ready." He was right. Their final move wasn't financial or legal. It was biological. It was the weapon they had wielded against me my entire life: guilt. The call came from an unlisted number. A calm professional voice identified himself as a Dr. Al-Jamil from the cardiac unit at Mount Sinai, Miami's most prestigious hospital. "Ms. Ambrose." It's about your father, Richard. He was brought in this morning by ambulance. He's had a severe cardiac event. His condition is critical. Your mother is here. She's distraught. She's been asking for you. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from my lungs. Every rational thought, every piece of evidence of their betrayal, every ounce of my newfound resolve evaporated in the face of two words: cardiac event. A lifetime of conditioning rushed back in a tidal wave, a Pavlovian response I thought I had conquered. The voice of the 19-year-old girl who had promised to be the family's failsafe screamed in my head, "He's your father! What if this is real? What if your actions did this?" Julian's voice on my other line was a lifeline to sanity, sharp and insistent as an alarm. "It's a lie, Evelyn. It's a goddamn trap. This is what they do. They know it's the only move they have left. Don't go. Don't you dare go." I was torn, suspended in a terrible moment of indecision. My mind screamed trap, but my heart, that traitorous organ, whispered, but what if to go would be to walk back into their web, to prove that after everything I was still theirs to control? To not go and for it to be real would be a burden, a guilt I would have to carry for the rest of my life. Then the new Evelyn, the one forged in the fire of Positano, the one who wore the Patek on her wrist, not as a gift, but as a trophy to control. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't fall apart. I acted like a strategist. I took a deep, steadying breath that filled my lungs with ice. I thanked the doctor for the information and hung up. My next call was not to the hospital's main line. It was to a client of mine, a quiet but powerful man who sat on the hospital's board of directors. I didn't panic or plead. I spoke in the calm, measured tones of a business inquiry. I told him a dear family friend, Richard Ambrose, had been admitted and that his wife was terribly overwrought. To spare her any further distress, I asked if he could use his position to get me a discreet, high-level, and completely accurate update on the patient's actual condition. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. The truth was both pathetic and damning. Richard was indeed at the hospital, but he was in a short-term observation room on a completely different floor being treated for a severe anxiety attack with stress-induced hypertension. There had been no heart attack, no critical event. Eleanor, a master performer, had manufactured a tragedy, lying to the emergency room staff and embellishing his symptoms to lure me into their final trap. The trap wasn't just disarmed, it was vaporized. And with it, the last stubborn thread of familial obligation in my heart finally irrevocably snapped. I no longer felt anger. I felt nothing but a cold, clear pity for two people, so morally bankrupt they would use a hospital as a stage for their final, desperate performance. I never went to the hospital. I never called them back. My response came 2 hours later in the form of a legal document delivered by courier to my mother in the hospital waiting room. It was a final, non-negotiable settlement. The terms were clear, cold, and absolute. Richard and Eleanor would receive a monthly stipend transferred from an anonymous account. It was enough to afford a comfortable but modest apartment in a quiet suburb, enough for groceries and utilities and a simple life. It was not enough for country clubs, for charity galas, for Italian yachts. In exchange, they would sign a legally binding contract, a lifetime restraining order, never to contact me, my business, or any of my associates again in any form. If they refused or ever violated the terms, the stipend would cease and I would proceed with the SEC filing and press criminal charges for fraud. They signed. The war was over. I met Julian at a quiet bar downtown, a place with dark wood and low light where deals were made and chapters were closed. He slid a folder across the polished table, the psychological profile on Mr. Tanaka, the price for his help. I reached for it, my duty to fulfill my end of our bargain. But he put his hand on top of it, stopping me. My payment? He said, looking me directly in the eye. A flicker of something I'd never seen from him before, respect in his gaze, was a front row seat to the most masterful, hostile takeover I've ever witnessed. Revenge is a messy, emotional business, Evelyn. What you did was art. Clean. Perfect. That was my payment. We're even. He took his hand away and slid the folder back to his side of the table. An unexpected act of professional grace from the city's most notorious shark. A year later, the whispers had faded. Richard and Eleanor were living in a condo in a faceless suburb an hour outside the city. They were ghosts haunting the memory of a life they hadn't earned. Their real punishment wasn't poverty. It was irrelevance. Stripped of their wealth and the status it afforded, their high society friends had vanished like morning mist. They had nothing left to offer, and so they were offered nothing in return. They had become invisible. The final scene of my old life was this. I was in my new apartment, a place filled with light and art. I'd chosen myself because I loved it, not because it would impress anyone. I opened a velvet-lined drawer in my desk and looked at the Patek Philippe watch. It was a beautiful object, a marvel of engineering and history. But it represented a time that was no longer mine, a value system I no longer subscribed to. It was a symbol of time measured in dollars and obligation. I closed the drawer. My new life began a week later at a small, messy pottery studio downtown. My hands, which had once signed million-dollar checks and navigated complex financial algorithms with detached precision, were now covered in wet gray clay. I was on a potter's wheel, my entire focus narrowed to the spinning mound in front of me, trying to shape a simple bowl. It was lopsided, uneven, and utterly imperfect. And for the first time in my entire life, I looked at something I had made, and I smiled. A real smile, one that reached my eyes and felt like the sun breaking through clouds. I glanced at my wrist. It was bare. I didn't need a watch to tell me what my time was worth anymore. For the first time, my time was simply, truly my own. For my entire life, I was taught that strength meant holding my family up no matter the cost. I finally learned that true strength isn't about how much weight you can carry for others. It's about having the courage to put that weight down and finally start building a life that is truly your own. That's my story for now. Thank you for sitting with me through it. If you've ever felt like your worth was tied to what you could give rather than who you are, if you've ever felt like family was both your safest harbor and your deepest wound, if you've ever been torn between the duty to hold on and the need to walk away, or maybe you've never been through this yourself, but your heart simply recognizes the pain in my story, just comment yes below. Sometimes just acknowledging a shared truth is the first step toward healing. Feel free to share a piece of your own story if you feel safe to do so, or just listen to others. Often that is more than enough. I'll be here reading. We'll be here for each other. And maybe in this space, stories like ours can finally find a home. Until next time, take care of yourself. And please remember, healing takes time, but you don't have to do it alone.